Oh my, yeah. One, if you're available for hire to come give that same intro at like my in-laws next Thanksgiving dinner, please let me know. Two, thank you everybody for coming. This is way more people than I expected. I want to thank Skip, Rutherford, and I want to thank everyone at the Clinton School for bringing me here. I'm always looking for an excuse to come back to Arkansas, and this is, I can't think of a better one than this, than to spend tonight with y'all. I scratched out some notes, and they say things like Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Cotton, and I'm going to try and make sense of them in a second. I think I can get there. But I'm going to do something kind of annoying and read something I wrote because I think it would be inappropriate for me to come up here tonight and not acknowledge what happened yesterday with Daca. So, yeah, I mean, it would be strange for me to be up here and not talk about President Donald Trump's decision to initiate the rescission of Daca. A decision that's shameful and antithetical to everything and every ideal this country was built on. And what he's done, and what Attorney General Jeff Sessions have done with political cover from folks you know well here in Arkansas, Senator Tom Cotton and your Attorney General Leslie Rutledge, is to lash out the way you would expect a frustrated child to lash out 9 months into a presidency with control of every lever of government and unable to accomplish a single thing of any force or consequence to anybody in this country. And in doing so, they've cast their lot with some of our country's most unfortunate villains, people like George Wallace and Orville Faubus, who use the politics of racial resentment to further their own political career. And we didn't pick this fight. This is a fight we'd never want to wage, but they've asked for it, and we're going to give them the fight of their lives. So. And the last thing I'll say about that, and this will be my pivot to like a happier conversation, is that, you know, these are things that you don't forget, right? And we, and by we I mean Indivisible, is not going to stop until the future of every dreamer in this country is secure, and we're not going to stop until the political future of everyone who condoned this decision is over. So, if you're all available to like join Beth at my family gatherings to like clap for me too, I'm happy to do that. My parents are here. Like, this is the most applause they're ever going to hear from me. So I want to talk a little bit about Indivisible's origin story, but first I want to acknowledge everyone here who is in Little Rock's, like, unknowns to me until a few weeks ago, giant Indivisible chapter. So Little Rock in Central Arkansas, will you please stand up if you're in that Indivisible group? So, yeah. So I sent an email off not long after I had lunch with a few of them today to another Indivisible member in California who runs a group in San Francisco, which politically they have nothing to do, right? Like, they're very happy with all of their members, but they have an unbelievable you know, collection of technical skills that most of our other groups don't have. And the thing they decided to do, since they don't have to harass their members to do the things they need to do in office, is to build digital tools for our groups to manage the things they want to do. And that conversation just started today, but I know they're going to help you do whatever you need to do going forward. And before I get started too, I just want to thank you. This is the work you're doing in this state gives me more hope than I felt about anything political in Arkansas in my entire adult lifetime. And I'm going to embarrass my folks a couple times tonight since they're here. That's like the joy of having a microphone and being, you know, their kid. But, you know, one of the references we always make about our groups is that, you know, our local groups like Indivisible LRCA, like Northeast Arkansas Indivisible, like Ozarks, like all the other groups in Arkansas, is that they're the rock stars of this movement and we're just their roadies. And I make that reference, one, because it's true, but I make the weird analogy because my mom is like the world's biggest and she's the most embarrassingly big Pearl Jam fan in the world. Yeah, she has pictures of Eddie Vedder on like pillows and sweatshirts at home. She named her dog Evie for Eddie Vedder. She doesn't know it's birthday, so she celebrates it on Eddie Vedder's birthday. Yeah. So that, and actually the last time I think we were in Little Rock together, it was for a West Memphis 3 fundraiser that Eddie Vedder headlined. So let me try and make sense of these notes here, because I wrote them sort of today as I was thinking about what I wanted to say here. The first one says bar and commiserate, which I think is a fitting way to start a talk about what this organization has grown into, because I think like most everyone else in this room and like millions of other people across the country and the majority of the country, the folks who wrote and now run Indivisible spent election night and the nights after literally in bars. That's our origin story. You know, we started in a bar. That's like the one thing I'll admit my parents, well, I'll say they're wrong about lots of things. This is the one thing I know for sure they were wrong about, which is that nothing good happens in a bar after midnight. Indivisible is one of those things. It's a thing that we began to think about in those sort of despair-filled days after the election. One, we were trying to make sense of what just happened, but two, we were asking ourselves what in the hell we were going to do next, right? And for most of the folks who helped write it, if you look at like the group of people that were involved, Ezra Levin, Leah Greenberg, our co-executive directors, and the other folks who were co-authors of the guide, the original guide, most of us spent significant time either on the Hill in DC working for members of Congress, or in the executive branch, or doing other things related to state and local government. And ultimately, out of those after midnight bar conversations that sometimes migrated into till 4 in the morning living room conversations, we ultimately decided that the thing we would do would be to write down everything we knew about the best ways to influence, your members of Congress, and hope somebody would read it. And we took most of those lessons from an unlikely source, which you probably all know by now, but that was the Tea Party. And we did that because while most of us were in DC as the Tea Party sort of came to power, we watched with great jealousy as this rabid group of folks were able to take an historically popular president, a supermajority in the Senate, and a huge majority in the House, and grind everything they wanted to do to a halt. And we asked ourselves, if you strip away all of the terrible things about the Tea Party, the racism and the literal violence, many of the folks who helped write the guide were staffers during the Tea Party's rise and were physically assaulted by members of the Tea Party at town halls. And that's actually like a good time to pause and say, if you read any of our stuff, whether it's the Indivisible Guide or the documents that have come later, we're very explicit that we are a nonviolent organization, right? Like, it's literally the first box on almost every page of every document we produce, and no group has better exemplified that than our Indivisible Little Rock Central Arkansas chapter. They deserve all the credit in the world for doing that, and for being good ambassadors for everything else that this network of folks across the country are doing. But anyway, so we took all of this stuff that we wrote down on cocktail napkins and with like other random things in people's living rooms, and we wrote a Google Doc, and our highest ambition was that we'd post it online, our parents would like it, and like 3 of our friends would read it. And if you go back and read, actually I don't know if the Google Doc is still alive, but if it were, you would go back and say like, there's like 14 spelling mistakes per page. Looks like it was formatted by like my 7-year-old or 6-year-old nephew. It's a pretty horrendous document. But we all sort of watched in amazement that first night as it went from like the dozen or so of us reading this Google Doc to a few hundred, to a few thousand, to 10,000, to so much that it crashed to Google Doc, which is how we found out that Google Docs can crash. And it happened in ways that we never expected. I mean, we were sitting there watching the doc sort of double and triple and quadruple in readership, and also watching on Twitter as people like Leo DiCaprio, so see, I brought it back to him, and George Takei, who, I'm sure most of you know this, was brought to Arkansas and put into, an internment camp during World War II, and actually has a really wonderful quote over there in the Anne Frank exhibit, or the Anne Frank garden. Started retweeting our guide and telling people to read it, and like, we didn't know who any of these people were. I mean, we knew who they were, but we didn't know how the hell they found our document. And that was sort of the turning moment for us. This all happened on my birthday, so it launched on December 17th, publicly, crashed that night. I was on a plane that day because the way it always works is because I'm a December birthday, like I haven't lived in Arkansas for like 7 or 8 years now. I'm always on a plane like to Arkansas on my birthday, so that's where I was. I was flying, I think, to my then fiance's place in New Orleans and getting like updates from people as all this is happening. And then we got up the next day and decided like we have an opportunity we never expected before us to harness all of this energy and all of this enthusiasm and all of this interest in what we thought was like some really simple advice and see what we can build out of it. And it's a weird thing to build a boat while you're in it, but that's kind of what we've been doing. And that's what all of our local groups have been doing too. I think on the national side, like we feel that way. I know our groups feel that way too, that like this is not a position any of us expected or asked for. I would much rather be like, you know, spending time with my new wife and like taking our cat Pickles on a walk in his harness right now, but it wasn't quite in the cards. And to go from this terribly worded and terribly formatted Google Doc to what has become a 6,000 plus group network with at least 2 groups in every congressional district and an average of about 18 in every congressional district. There's one district in California that won't get more than 2 that we're really upset with. I'm just kidding. We're not upset with you. To go from there to there is something we never expected to happen. And it's a testament. And when I said earlier that we think of ourselves as the roadies to our groups as the rock stars, we've only grown that quickly and that much because folks in their community have said like enough is enough. And it wasn't just us, it was millions of other people across the country recognizing that, this is an extraordinary time in which our president, Donald Trump, is an existential threat to all people everywhere. And we have to do whatever we can to stop the worst things he wants to do from happening. And that brings me to some of our big wins, which again, like you already know about, I don't have to tell you these things that we won, but I'm going to because I have a microphone. This is the mistake you made inviting me, Skip. So the first and most obvious one, right, is that Trump Care is dead and Obamacare is alive. And no group of people is more responsible for that in this country than our indivisible chapters across the US. That is an 8-year, $1 billion push premised on nothing on the policy side except for resentment towards a black president that our group stopped cold in its tracks. And that for us, like, that's not a fight we expected to win. So we thought we could stop it in the House, and we did the first time, and then we lost the second round. And we were all literally sitting up with each, watching the final vote in the Senate go down, figuring out how to write our "we just lost this" email to all of you. And that's first of all, that's an apology kind of late for why the email was so late about winning that. But also, it's because there is no good reason for us to win fights like that, right? Like, Republicans have the White House, they have both chambers of government, and we're 9 months into that complete control of the federal government without a single signature win for them. And it's not because they're incompetent, because they're not. There are plenty of smart and bright and motivated people on their side. It's because of all of you, because you've decided that you're not going to let them get away with perpetrating some of the worst public policy decisions that might ever be made in a generation. And people ask, so for a lot of the folks who helped write the guide, this is now the thing they do full time, right? Like, we have staff. Ezra and Leah are our executive directors. We have people who, are organizers with all of our local groups across the country. That's not true for me. So I still have a job at Penn. This is the thing I do for fun on the side, which is how it was for all of us for a very long time. That was the kind of like fun thing about winning the first healthcare fight for us in the House, is that we were literally all doing this like in our pajamas at night at 8 o'clock and on the weekends. And our groups were doing it like on their lunch breaks and after work at like 6 o'clock. And that was enough to stop a $1 billion 8-year machine. But I do this because I think about my parents when stuff like this comes up. My parents, never had real health insurance until Arkansas expanded Medicaid. My sister and her kids and her now husband would not have health insurance if Arkansas hadn't expanded. Nobody else in my family went to college until my little brother and I, or finished college. And for me, like, these things are deeply personal, and that's why, I am more than happy to get out of Philadelphia and leave my new wife behind to come hang out with you tonight because one, I think she's happy to have one-on-one time with the cat, who she has more pictures of than me, but also because these groups, these rooms are the things that keep us going. Because for us, it's really easy to write an explainer on what budget reconciliation is. It's not that much fun to write. It's probably less fun to read. It's way more fun to come and do stuff like this. So the second one I want to talk about is related to the very vile man who announced the Daca rescission yesterday, or Attorney General Jeff Sessions. That's a man who right now would have been running and already shut down the Russian probe into the Trump campaign. If you go back and read the clips about his nomination to that post from January and February, or January, I guess, it was pretty clear that he was going to pass 70-30 with almost no hearing. So how many of you made calls about his nomination? Yeah, so you and millions of others are responsible for the position we now find ourselves in with an independent prosecutor who just raided Paul Manafort's house, who has probably flipped him into cooperating against the president. That would not have happened without all the pressure you put on both Republicans and Democrats. Because, as I'm sure you know by now, the general rule in the Senate is that when another senator gets nominated for a post like that, you may despise them, but you vote for them because it's the collegial thing to do. We felt really lucky, and we felt really excited about the fact that all of you decided that that wasn't going to happen this time. That a man who spoke favorably about the Klan in the 80s and the 90s didn't belong in the top civil rights position in the United States. And I have no doubt in my mind that that investigation would be over right now if not for the work you did to stop him. He still got through, but he doesn't get to lead the probe, and that's what matters. And the other thing I want, so those are the biggest wins. I want to talk a little bit too about the way that we sort of build our organizational model, right? So there's a simple truth to why Indivisible exists as both a national and a local organization. And I say this knowing that I have lots of good friends who work at these other organizations who are really smart and do really good work. Some of them are official wings of the Democratic Party and some of them are not. There are things like Move On and Working Families. And we partner with them on all kinds of things that are really important. But we exist because they let us down. There would be no Indivisible if the other groups in our constellation of progressive groups had been doing the work we needed them to do. You wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here. Again, I'd be walking that cat in his harness around Philadelphia. And the way that we've done that has been to break with their conventional model of organizing, which is a very push-driven model, right? Where you have a big email list and you pump out things for people to do on it, and they either do it or they don't, and you don't really care as long as people read the email. Our strategy was different in that our model unintentionally was to produce content and then hope and know that you were all way smarter than we were about how to apply it wherever you live. With the understanding that what works in Jonesboro might not work in Little Rock, might not work in Fort Smith, might not work in Harrison, might not work in wherever. And I say unintentionally because starting an accidental nonprofit is a weird thing to do, and one of the consequences of that is we had no idea who our groups were for a very long time. We had an email for the first person who signed up, each group, and that was kind of it. And we've been able to backfill and get all of that data since, but our model remains mostly the same, right? We put content out there, and we understand that you all know your communities way better than we do, and we ask you to figure out how to apply it. And then when groups do a particularly good job, so if you look at the Tom Cotton Town Hall in February, we didn't have any guidance on anything we'd produced about bringing red and green cards to town halls. We didn't have anything about standing up to show solidarity with someone who asked a good question. Those are things that you all did and became a part of the core set of resources that we provided to all of our groups. And if you look across the country, all of the things you see in every town hall that now happen in the United States started in Arkansas at that town hall. And Tom Cotton hasn't quite gone down this path yet, but those town halls have been the thing that have pushed several other members of Congress from seeking re-election in 2018 and 2020. So Jason Chaffetz is one. There was another one announced just today. Yeah, you can clap for that. I'll clap for that. think there's like a half dozen now who have just said, like, you know, we've been painted into such a corner that we know we can't win a general election. We don't think we're going to win a primary election. So, like, we're just going to ride it out. And it's because for the first time in almost a decade, most of your members of Congress, your delegation in Arkansas included, are more worried about a general election than they are about a primary. And that's not because of like anything that like Ezra or Leah and I like tweet or write. It's because of the work that y'all do. And so I'm going to be pretty quick on the last couple like scratches of notes that I have here because unlike a few of your members of Congress, I do want to hear your questions and like have a conversation. But I want to like try to preempt some of them so we can have some more time to talk. And so I'm going to talk about some of the like inevitable pushback that we've received as we've gone on. The most obvious of which is like also my favorite, which is that like everyone in our groups is a paid protester. It's like, it's my favorite thing in the world because it's so like hilariously easy to disprove. And I think Wayne LaPierre was one of the speakers here not that long ago, and he was like the first one to make this claim in public. And so he was at like he was at CPAC, I think, and his claim was that every member of an Indivisible group was paid $1,500 a week to do their work. But so I just want to know. So today is September 6th, and if we started January 1st, and we take a really conservative estimate of how many people are in our groups at like 150, which is way less than most of our groups, but we'll give them like the benefit of the doubt. Somebody would be on the hook for about $48.6 billion. So my wife and I have been rewatching Narcos, so I know that that's almost what Pablo Escobar was worth at like the height of his empire. So if Mr. LaPierre sees this and wants to send us a check, we would take it. One of the other ones that we get quite often is that we've been labeled the Tea Party of the left, and people have asked us whether or not that's a thing we like and whether that's like a narrative we care to further. And first I would say like that actually feels like kind of a compliment because they were so successful at stopping all the things that they wanted stopped in DC. The other is that I would say the biggest points of differentiation for us in the Tea Party are like characteristic of the split between Democrats and Republicans right now anyway, right? So the things that fuel the Tea Party in the end weren't policy-based, and ours are, right? Like, I don't care about Donald Trump's race, or I don't care about any of the other things that go into forming the person that is him. I care about whether or not he wants to take health care away from 25 million people. I care about whether he wants to pick a fight with 800,000 of the country's most vulnerable children. Those are the things that we care about. They're not political, they're policy outcomes. And the other thing I would say is that, you know, when the other side makes it their sole goal to turn the nation's first black president into a one-term president and has nothing else to offer, we have no problem. We are not going to sit there and unilaterally disarm from the game of politics. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is sort of what comes next for us. So we get lots of questions from our groups about what's going to happen next with Indivisible, and I'm sure we have those questions here too. And there are a couple I'll talk a little bit about. Some of it's not public yet, so I can't tell you like everything, but I'll tell you what I can. One of those is that we're going to officially play around in elections. Our groups have been coming to us from day one and asking two things about elections. One, like, how do we win them? Which I don't think we have any better answers than anybody else. Like, it's really easy to go on TV and like talk about what it takes to win an election. It's a lot harder to do it. And the other is, how do we take all of these really smart, newly motivated, unbelievably talented people in our groups who want to run and get them into office? And those aren't easy questions, but those are the things that we're starting to do on the national side. We've hired, you know, a wing of our organization that is now dedicated entirely to electoral politics. And I'm sure those of you who follow us closely know that not that long ago we launched something called Indivisible 435, which is our plan to play in every congressional district in the country. And if you look at all of the target lists that are out there, whether it's the DCCC, whether it's PCCC, whether it's whoever, and ours, this district is going to be one of those, was going to be one of the most targeted in the entire country. And the only thing that's going to make the difference this time on whether or not you get the representative you want is whether or not people find a way to tap into the power and the talent and the energy of Indivisible, LRCA, and all the other groups in our congressional district because you're not going to. We haven't won without them. We're not going to win without them this time. The other thing that we get asked a lot about by our groups is why can't we do what we're doing at the federal level at the state level? Which is also a really important and incredibly hard question, right? Like, that's a thing we've been struggling with for a very long time. And the answer for us for quite some time was like, we don't think we can do it. That's like 50 states that are all like weirdly their own monster, and we don't know, like most of us are sort of accidentally all from the South, so like we know Texas and Arkansas and Alabama really well, but we don't know like most of the rest of the country that well, unless other folks have worked there. But we heard it enough from our groups that that's where our next big push is in terms of bringing on staff. So our first priority was to bring on field organizers who could give our groups the tools they need to keep doing the work they're doing. The second was to build up the campaign side of what we're doing so that we have an infrastructure in place to support good candidates from our groups and candidates that are not from our groups that our groups want to support. And the third is going to be translating all of this energy and all of this new expertise that you've all developed over the last 9 months, some for much longer than that, into doing what you've done in DC at your state house. And I can't think of a place where that is more urgently needed than Arkansas. We were just talking, before I came out here about whether or not I ever think about coming back to Arkansas. And I think about it all the time. My wife and I would love to come back. Our families are here. My parents are right there. Like, they drove in from Fort Smith for this. We would love to come back. And for my wife, it's an easier proposition. She's a dentist. She can do that anywhere. For me, it's a little bit different. I'm a professor. And so for me, the only place that I could probably find a job that's like directly in my field is the U of A. And there are a couple of reasons why that's probably not likely anytime soon. One of which is that those of you who, I don't know if you would remember this because this is before Indivisible, but I wrote like a not very nice guest column about the new chancellor and the stadium expansion. Yeah, some of you remember that. So it seems unlikely that he would hire me for anything anytime soon. That's okay. The other is that the thing I was known, I think, in Arkansas for before Indivisible was fighting with Charlie Collins on Twitter. That's like what most people would describe me as like the person who trolls Charlie Collins, which like he needs to be trolled, but that's fine. But the garbage pile of a bill that he passed in your last session to flood every campus in this state with guns is the biggest deterrent I could ever imagine to coming back. And the sad thing about that is, that was a bill framed as a thing about security and safety, and I can't think of a bigger lie to tell about a bill like that. One, it won't make anyone safer, it'll make them less safe. And two, it's a very cowardly way to go after higher education. Because he knows, and so do the people who voted for this bill, that's a bill that'll bleed your universities of faculty and students for as long as it's on the books. I get messages every week from folks in Arkansas who are in higher ed, either as faculty members or as staff members, who are looking for another place to go. And if you look at the experience of Texas and some of the other places where this has happened, that's the story that gets told after this bill, after a bill like this passes. So I say that because as soon as we roll out the state and local side of Indivisible, your job's going to be to repeal that bill so I can come home. And other than that, I'm going to close and then take your questions and whatever else you want to talk about. But I'm going to close with something that I heard Roxanne Gay say at an event in Philadelphia not that long ago, shortly after the election. And it has been one of the things that's kept me and a lot of our team going. And it's that, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's that the idea of America is possible, but it is not inevitable. It takes all of your work, it takes your labor, it takes your money, it takes everything you have to build the country you want, to build the country that we were promised. So with that, I want to thank you for inviting me here, and I look forward to whatever questions you have.
All right, we got lots of questions here, so let's wait for Mike. This one right here at the back. Jim, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Skip, thank you for having me. Could you talk a little bit about Data Refuge? That's...
Yeah, I'm happy to. I tried not to talk about all the other stuff in there, but I'm happy to talk about it now since you asked. So Data Refuge is another post-election personal existential crisis thing that happened. if you look back at what happened to environmental data in the days after George W. Bush was elected, and recently in Canada, and I can't remember the prime minister's name now before Trudeau, but their sole goal in terms of the environment once taking office was to either actively delete or over time to starve the servers of all the different places where critical environmental data is stored in their country. And so in the US, that means the EPA, it means NOAA, it means lots of other weather-related sub-agencies. And since we knew it was coming this time, we sort of asked ourselves, and we as a group of people, a group of librarians, researchers, folks who are in the tech industry in Philly, what we could do to try and back some of that up so that it's not lost. Because a lot of that stuff, once it's gone, it's gone. So we came up with a really simple model, which was to hold what we wound up not calling hackathons, but were basically hackathons, where we'd invite a bunch of folks who were much smarter than I am to come sit at a computer for half a day and take all of the data they could off of either an EPA or a NOAA server or site, and back it up using a number of other folks who had offered to host the data for us, Amazon being one of them. So we've essentially completely replicated. We haven't made it all public yet because it takes a while to sort through and create the metadata you need to use it. But we've essentially backed up the entire U.S. environmental data infrastructure. It's all public, so it's all stuff anybody could find. We just needed the people, the hours to sit down and do it.
Okay, we got a question right here.
Mr. Fleming, 54% of the American white women who voted for Donald Trump. 38% of the American men in this country will not vote for a female president.
Yeah.
But 47% of the American electorate did not go to the polls the last election. All we have to do is find clear-thinking, like-minded people who believe like we do, find them and get them to the polls the next election. When are we going to start doing that? We need two committees, one to find them, and the other committee can only take them to the polls. They can't stop at Starbucks and buy them a latte.
So, hey, what? Oh, yeah, that's one. I'll get to that in a second. Is Michael John Gray here? Where are you? Oh, the DPA chair. Well, he is not here, but I will tell you, that's the job your state party should do, right? So, and if your state party won't do it, that's the job I know that your Indivisible groups can do, right? So I said at the beginning, one of the reasons why Indivisible exists is because all of our institutions let us down, the party being one of them. And I say that as a card-carrying, like a literal card-carrying Democrat who worked for Barack Obama. Part of that, is less about going out and finding the people than it is about finding the people to vote than it is about putting forward candidates who inspire them to vote, right? And one of the criticisms that a lot of our groups get, I think really unfairly, is that they weren't around in November for the election, right? And there's probably some truth to we all slip into bits of apathy from time to time, but also you have to give people a reason to show up. And I don't say that as any criticism at all towards Hillary Clinton. I voted for her, I canvassed for her 3 days a week for 6 months. I worked at the DNC in Philly. I would have gone to hell and back for her. But that's not true for everybody. And so I think especially in a place like Arkansas, and especially in the 2nd District of Arkansas, where you do have a really big opportunity to win an election in 2018, it's going to be up to you to find who those people are that you want to put forward, and then to coalesce around them and put them in office. One of the only things I think we've universally learned on the national side of Indivisible is that our groups always know their local situation and their politics better than we do. So we can give them resources, but it's up to them to figure out the best way to use them. So what I would say to you is that you should stand up here after I'm done and start picking people out of this audience, because I see a half dozen in here who should probably run for office, and then take them with you. And Skip mentioned campus voting too. This is the other, so Connor Flox is here. There's Connor, raise your hand. Yeah. So Connor was one of a couple of, I think 2 or 3 people at the University of Arkansas, was it a year ago, 2 years ago now? A year ago. Fighting for the most common sense thing in the world, which is to get a voting station at at the largest employment center in Washington County, which is the University of Arkansas, which didn't happen because the presumption amongst the Republican-led election commission in Washington County is that people under 25 won't vote for them, so they don't deserve a voting station. Which one, like, if you spend any time on the University of Arkansas campus, you know it probably isn't true. Like, it's not a 90-10 liberal place. Like, it's probably pretty close to 50-50. And two is like just a really craven and despicable thing to do. They're election commissioners who should be ashamed of themselves and don't deserve to be in that office. So, one, we should applaud people like Connor for doing that because we need more people pushing those buttons. And two, we need better people in office because they decide who sits on those commissions.
Yeah, we got, I think, right up here. She has a question right here, Garth. Up here at the front, Garth.
Billy, could you please clarify Indivisible's position on endorsement of candidates?
Yeah, I mean, so we don't have an official position, mostly because Indivisible isn't, as a national organization, isn't allowed to make those choices, right? We're not allowed to pick candidates to support. Our groups can do that if they want to, but again, like, that's a thing we leave in the hands of our groups. If they decide, you know, 90-10 or universally that they want to back somebody, that's great. Like, y'all can do whatever you need to do to keep your group going. If you decide that it's going to be too divisive, which a lot of our groups have decided, that's also fine. I think that's a decision that our groups have to make for themselves. We're never going to push somebody to do one or the other. I think one of the most valuable things our groups can do, and I know you've started to do this, is to just invite candidates to come speak, right? And giving everybody the same opportunity to come address your group. Not everybody's going to come, but if you give them all the chance to go, your group's going to self-select who they decide ought to be in that office. And if it's unanimous, then you can make a decision from there. And if it's not, then you can figure out how to navigate that too. You're like I said, our groups are way smarter than we are, so you're going to figure out how to do that better than I can.
Yes, sir, right back here. Wait a minute, got a microphone coming at you.
Following up on something you said earlier, and whether it's you or your group, in my opinion, there's been a huge divide, urban-rural.
Yeah.
And your group sounds so urban. What I'm interested in hearing is your policies or your strategic plans coming up for addressing the issues of rural America, which in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Minnesota turned out to be quite critical.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple answers to that, and that's a really good question. And having grown up in rural Arkansas and being part of a group that's run by people who mostly grew up in the rural South, that's a question we think about a lot. One is that the issues we decide to take big stands on, so healthcare being one, Daca being another, are issues that overwhelmingly affect rural America. Arkansas, Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania are some of the biggest beneficiaries of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. And we may not frame it, we may not say this is a rural issue, but it is a rural issue, right? Like, that is, the state of Arkansas could not function, like its government would literally go bankrupt without that law. And anybody who tells you otherwise either doesn't know what they're talking about or is lying to you. And the other is that we're in a strange position in that we have zero control over government, right? Like, it would be easy for us to stake out positions on issues that are explicitly focused on rural America and have no pathway to implementation, right? So we're slowly figuring out how to, like, transition from an opposition-only group to a group that does put down some markers and say these are the things you have to stand for if you want to stand with us. But we're not there yet. I don't know if we'll get there before the 2018 election. I think if we could afford to wait that long, we would wait until we had at least one chamber of government to be able to say that. Because it's great to say those things, and it's easy to say those things when there are no consequences. That's the predicament that Republicans find themselves in now, right? Is they spent 8 years building a political majority on a lie, and now they have to decide if they're going to govern by it and shoot the country in the foot, or if they're going to admit they were lying. And I'm not sure which one they've done. They haven't passed anything, so I think it's probably admitting they were lying. But we don't want to find ourselves in the same position.
Yeah, question. Let's see who has it. Yeah, here we go.
Mr. Mull.
Hey, Dr. Fleming.
Hi.
It's good to see you tonight. You've talked a lot tonight about candidates, elections, and whatnot. In Arkansas, we've seen Democratic candidates continue to get beat, and our numbers in the state legislature fall. Yet in the last two cycles, we've had progressive constitutional amendments passed, from raising minimum wage to passing medical marijuana.
Yeah.
Let's assume that we could pass another progressive constitutional amendment. Which one would you have passed?
Probably recreational marijuana. That's an easy question. Yeah. There you go.
Hey, your mother liked that.
Yeah. When I said she was a Pearl Jam fan, like, there are other things that go along with that, so.
All right. Yes, ma'am. Right back here. Microphone's coming at you.
My question is related to the one that was asked up front before. And I'd like to know whether Indivisible, either at the national level or in some of the chapters, are doing anything to work against the voter repression policies that have been started to be or have been implemented.
So that's the singular motivating factor. That's been the thing that's pushed us over the edge of saying we can't do state and local policy, like it's too big a lift, to saying we're going to figure out a way to do it. Because there is no bigger problem in this country. There's no bigger threat to the levers of democracy than gerrymandering and the abolishment of the right to vote. I think you've had Ari Berman in here, right? To give one of the, Ari Berman?
Yeah, we've had on.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't think of a better author about this topic than him. And I can't think of a more important issue for the future of this country than making sure everyone's franchise is protected and expanded where needed.
Got time for one more question. Be right here, ma'am. It's coming at you.
I'd like to know how to join the Indivisibles. I Googled you, and I couldn't find anything, believe it or not.
Oh, wow. So if you come, I'll tell you how to do it right now, but then come up here and I'll show you on my phone afterwards. If you go to our website, indivisibleguide.com, you scroll down a little bit, there'll be like a Find Your Chapter tab, and it'll be where you enter in your zip code, and it'll both show you in a list and on a map where every group that's registered with us within a certain radius is located. So in Arkansas, I think you can set the radius from like anywhere from 1 mile to 20 miles, and you'll see anywhere from like 6 to like 50 groups. So there's plenty of room for you. Yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to a young man that has changed America, Billy Fleming.